Lands here. Ah, yes, it is. Didn't even look like us.
Okay, so several of us went down to the Master Naturalist Conference a few months ago, and some of them went to the bear program down there and got very, very excited about the bear project. We're going to learn about living with bears, and then we're going to take that knowledge out into the community in various ways. So with that in mind, we have Katie Martin speaking to us tonight. She is the statewide deer, bear, turkey biologist for the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. She works alongside the project leaders for these three big game species to implement a variety of projects with focal areas on human-wildlife conflict, disease, and research. Prior to this position, Katie was a district wildlife biologist with DWR in the central Piedmont area for 8 years. Before coming to DWR, Katie worked as an agricultural and natural resource extension agent in Lunenburg County and as a private lands wildlife habitat biologist throughout the central and southern Piedmont areas. Katie received both her bachelor's in wildlife science and master's in forestry from Virginia Tech. And before we start real quick, we are having on the 29th of February at Claytor Lake State Park, there is part 2 of the training, which you have to do if you're going to be a part of this project. Carol Kaufman is heading this project but she couldn't be here tonight. But she's asking that anybody that is interested in doing part 2 of this training and doing programs and running tables and that kind of thing, please sign up on Better Impact for that second part of the training. And with that, I'll turn it over to Katie.
All right. Thank you all very much. Yep. Tonight is going to be your basic overview of like Black Bear 101, just a little bit all about bears. And then that second presentation will actually be the presentation that you all will receive to give out and take to the community. So tonight's going to be a big one. Your second training will be a little bit shorter, more condensed version of the thing that you guys will take out to the community. But tonight will be all about bears. So let me see if I can share my screen. Always the fun part of virtual meetings, all the technology. All right. Let's see. Can somebody let me know if you see anything and what it looks like?
Hey, Mayor.
All right. Can anybody let me know if you see the presentation and is it in the presenter view? Good.
Looks good to me. Yeah.
All right.
Looks good to me.
Perfect. This is always the biggest hurdle. All the technology. And since it is a little bit difficult to see folks, we'll break the talk up into a couple of sections. We'll do some biology first, then we'll get into kind of conflict management. So I'll stop after the biology side. And if anybody has questions, feel free to ask questions. And then again, at the end, certainly ask questions, but it's a little hard to see if anybody has a question in the middle of it. So probably just pause. And then at the end, we'll have plenty of time for questions. So yep, we will talk about black bear management in Virginia tonight. So just quickly, I do work for the Department of Wildlife Resources, and our kind of catchphrase or mission phrase is to conserve, connect, and protect. And when we're talking about black bears, that really comes into play because we have done a great conservation success story of bringing bears back across the state of Virginia from near extirpation. We want to connect people to this resource. We want people to know we have bears out there on the landscape. But then we do need to protect and make sure that folks are taking care of their resources. They know what to do to make sure they're not having negative encounters with bears. So it really works well that conserve, connect, protect comes into play really well with black bears. So tonight we're going to go over just a little history about bears in Virginia, kind of their status and what they look like today across the state. We'll do some basic biology of black bears and then kind of our management philosophy here at the department and really getting into human bear conflicts. We do have quite a good population of bears on the landscape, but we also have a lot of people on the landscape. So sometimes that can cause a bit of conflict. So first off, the trick question of the night are what kind of bears do we have here in Virginia? And since I'm not right there with you, I'm sure everybody is raising their hand. You all know the correct answer to this, that it is black bears, that we only have black bears here in Virginia as our native bear species. Unfortunately, now you might have thought, well, that's a really silly question. Why did you ask us what type of bears we have? You would be amazed, or maybe not, that when we asked adults this question on a survey, less than 60% of the population got this right. Now, kids are really good at this. Usually when we ask this to school groups, kids know it. They say black bears. But our adult population across the state, less so. We got answers of polar bears, grizzly bears, you name it. Adults said we had all kinds of bears, but we do not. Our native and only black bear, or only species of bears in Virginia are black bears. So a little bit of history about bears here in Virginia. They are a native species, so they have been native to the state. And, pre-European settlement, you would find bears all across the state of Virginia. But with no regulations prior to 1916, there was no Department of Wildlife Resources or Game Commission out there. So they were nearly hunted to extirpation. So basically, they almost went extinct across the state of Virginia. There were only a few remnant populations left over in our far western mountains. So think of like Highland, Allegheny, Bath, those counties, which very rugged, very rural areas. And then down in the Dismal Swamp in the far southeastern part of the state. So in the early 1900s, that would have been the only place you would have found black bears, is that far western part of the mountains, far southeast. So then in 1916, the Game Commission was formed, and with it became regulations. So they had the first conservation officers or game wardens out on the landscape to kind of stop this market hunting. So bears were then not listed as a game species again until 1930. And even then, it was a very limited hunting season, only in very select counties. But then over the last 100 plus years, we've had quite the success story between those harvest regulations, between habitat improvements and protecting habitat areas. Bears have made quite a comeback across the state. And I'll show you in a map on the next slide that we pretty well have bears all across the state now. So we kind of look at this as one of our big conservation success stories, because bears came back from the brink of extinction in the state to now a very healthy population. And in doing so, this was all done naturally. Bears were never translocated anywhere across the state. We did not stock bears into new areas. It was just natural migration of those bears out of the mountains and out of the swamp area back into the rest of the state. So this is what we call our current bear range. So the green counties mean that bears are there and you can see bears. The orange, yellow counties are where we may not see bears as frequently, but we actually, except for the far eastern shore, there have been reported sightings of bears in every county across the state of Virginia. So again, very healthy. Now, I'll show you some maps a little bit later that show you where we have more numbers of bears, where we kind of have smaller populations versus larger. But basically across the entire state, you are in bear country. You can see a black bear in Virginia, which is pretty cool. Black bears also make up kind of a neat range here in Virginia, because they are part of this contiguous range of bears that go all the way from Florida up into Maine. So you can find healthy black bear populations up from Florida all up the eastern coast, all the way up into the state of Maine, which is really quite interesting. And they have varying populations across those states, but really good, healthy populations in most of them. Currently, our largest bear populations in the state are still in our northwestern mountains. So again, that Allegheny, Bath, Highland area, down into Rockingham and Rockbridge, and then down in the southeast in the Dismal Swamp. So that is a great refuge for bears down there. So that's where we have our two largest populations of bears. But again, all throughout the state, we have healthy populations that you can see. All right, so now we'll dive into some of this basic bear biology. So we'll talk just a little bit about, their life history, behaviors, the habitat that they need, movements, diet, and reproduction. So a little bit all about bear biology here. So first off, a common question about bears is, well, how big do they get? And so a male bear, which is often referred to as a boar, can weigh anywhere from 200 to over 500 pounds. So this male bear in that top photo, he probably hit the scales a little over 530 pounds. He was a big guy that we were doing some research project with. But they can weigh well over 500 pounds. The largest one on record was harvested down in Suffolk County, down in the southeastern part of the state, and weighed 740 pounds at the time he was harvested. We routinely get reports of bears 600 pounds during our annual bear hunting season. So they can get quite large. Now, females tend to be a little bit smaller. Their average weight is anywhere from about 100 to 250 pounds. But again, they can also get pretty big. So the bottom photo on this slide is of a female black bear during the winter when she was at a den. We had actually worked her up, put a new GPS collar on her. And at that time, she weighed 336 pounds, and that was when she should have been at her skinniest, we will say. So they can get quite large as well. But the amazing thing is the middle picture is about a 2-week-old bear cub. So they start out weighing less than a pound and can end up growing to these animals that'll weigh 500-600 pounds. So it's quite astonishing how big they can become from what they started out as. So a couple of characteristics unique to black bears here in the state is they have these large non-retractable claws, which are very important to them. They use them for a variety of things. But really interesting, so again, this middle photo there is about a 3-week-old black bear cub, and you can see those claws are already really defined. Even though that little bear can't really walk, doesn't even have its eyes open yet, those claws are already well defined and just going to continue to grow and be more developed from there. But they use those claws for things like climbing trees, especially young bear cubs when they get to be about 3 to 4 months of age. Their primary defense is just to climb. And so you can see the lower left photo is a little about 12 to 13-week-old cub. It's climbing up a power pole. That is what they do when they get scared or something scares them. They just run up a tree and can climb up it. The picture above that, you've got an older bear climbing a tree looking for food. They'll climb, one, to escape from danger or any type of danger they feel, but also to get food. They'll also use those claws for digging up insects. So black bears love to eat things like ants or termites, bees that nest in the ground. And so they'll use those claws for digging those up or turning over stumps and rocks to get at that material. They use their claws a bit for defensive uses, but really a lot of it is for marking territory. So that upper right photo is on a pine tree, and that is where a black bear during the mating season will stand up and scratch onto the tree to leave their scent marking and kind of a mark of their territory there. And male black bears generally will do that, usually around the month of late June, early July here in Virginia. And it lets female bears know who's in the area, but it also lets other males know how big that male is. If you can stand up on your back legs and you reach up to about 7 feet in height, and another bear comes along and he can only reach up to 5 feet, he knows he probably needs to leave the area, that he's not the biggest bear in town. He won't have breeding rights there. He needs to move on. So it lets them kind of mark their territories, so everybody knows who's in town, especially during the breeding season. So some of the senses of black bears, their sight is actually pretty comparable to humans. So they can see in color, which helps them again for things like foraging for insects and berries and all, but they actually have pretty poor long distance vision. And so this bear in the photograph here is standing up, and that is not any type of indication of, I'm about to attack, to do anything like that. She's standing up to try to get a better idea of her surroundings. So bears will often do that. They'll stand, they'll kind of peer around and look at things to try to get a better idea because their vision is just not as good as some other animals on the landscape. But at the same time, when a bear is standing up like that, they're using their number one sense that they have, and that's their sense of smell. And so as a bear stands, a lot of times you'll see them start flicking their tongue to kind of wet the end of their nose and open their mouth up. And that just helps them suck in all the scent molecules that are out there to really figure out what is on the landscape. So they use that sense of smell really well to know what is out there across the landscape. And they also have excellent hearing. So oftentimes when you're out hiking or in the woods, we don't see a bear could have been around there, but they use that sense of smell and that hearing to get out of town before we ever see them. All right, so one of these things that we've all probably heard forever and ever is that, one of the most dangerous things you can do is to get in between a mother bear and her cubs. So, true or false? And probably you kind of guess if I'm putting this out here as a question that likely it's actually false. So this is one of those things that, yes, mother bears are protective. They do take really good care of their young. But they are not really these big, bad, mean animals that come running after you if you get in between them and their cubs. Again, a cub's best defense is actually to climb. And so what they will do if they sense danger is the mother will send the bear up a tree. And you can see these little tiny cubs climbing up the tree just as fast as they can go. Because again, that's their best defense mechanism. When you weigh 5, 6, 7 pounds, you're not big enough to really fight with anything. The mother will often leave. So she'll tree the cubs and then she'll try to draw away whatever thing has caused them, to think it's danger, whether it's a person, a dog, whatever she is perceived as the danger, she will actually try to lead it away. So she'll leave the area while the cubs stay treed. Best thing to do, leave the area, leave them alone. The mom will come back generally at night. She's going to wait until it's nice and quiet. She makes a few little calls and hits on the tree, and those cubs will come scampering down and go back with her. But it's not like it's an imminent attack. If you happen to see a mother bear and her cubs, she will likely run those bears up a tree and actually leave the area. So bears are generally pretty solitary animals. You're not going to see packs or herds of bears walking around on the landscape, except for during the time of year when females have their cubs. So you could see, as in the lower right photo, there's a female bear with her 3 yearlings that have been with her for several months at that time. But the males and females don't hang out together except for the breeding season, so during a really short window of time. But otherwise, bears are pretty solitary. They can be active any time of day, even during the summertime when it's really hot out. You can still see a bear moving around in the middle of the day. Now, they're most active usually dawn and dusk, that crepuscular time period, like so many of our wild animals are. But again, middle of the day doesn't mean anything's wrong with the bear if you happen to see it out at noon versus later in the day. They're very intelligent, very curious, and this can cause some issues because they are so intelligent that helps them kind of figure out some things, trash cans and doors and things like that, that can get them into a little bit of trouble. And generally, it's their stomach that is driving them to get into trouble. They are just opportunistic. They will eat anything. And so this is where sometimes we end up with some conflict as they're trying to find what they can go and eat. And they are naturally very wary of people. They don't really want to be close to people. But if they learn that there's food, easy food available near people, they will become very, lose a lot of that wariness and caution and will stay close to, human areas, habituated areas, if they have learned that that's where food is. So that is something we want to avoid. We don't want them to associate that there's easy food around where a lot of people are. So what type of things does a bear need to survive its habitat requirements? Well, pretty much just like any other wild animal out there. Food, water, and cover, obviously the big ones. And a little bit different than for some animals, it does need den sites. So female bears usually will go into a den in the wintertime, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into their reproduction. But they do need these secluded areas where they can den up to have their cubs. So they really like a wide variety of habitat types. Hardwood forests are very important because those produce acorns, which are one of their most important food sources in the fall. But they also love early successional habitats. So places, forests that have been cut, that have been managed for timber, and you've got that new growth coming back up is one of their favorite places to be because those areas generally produce a lot of soft mass. So blackberries, blueberries, things like that. They also love to be around water, so stream corridors, rivers, creeks. They like being in those water areas. But in edges, a lot of edge habitat is where they'll use. So they use a wide variety of habitat types across the landscape. So what are bears doing at different times of the year? So in the spring, it's really a time of looking for food. So as bears leave those winter dens, especially again, females that have had cubs, they are really looking for food. And unfortunately, there's really not a lot in the early part of the spring for bears to eat. So they will travel quite a bit looking for food. One of their all-time favorite things to eat is actually skunk cabbage. So they'll come out this time of year. We'll have male bears or females that don't have cubs. They will be out eating skunk cabbage pretty heavily. And then after that, May apples, when the May apples start blooming, they really hit those a lot too. So this time of year is when you could see a female with her cubs. Once they exit the den, you'll see a female bear with her cubs behind her, while male bears will be pretty solitary. They're not hanging out with anybody. Once we get into the summer, so June, July, and August, that starts the breeding season here in Virginia. So July and early August is kind of the peak of the breeding here in Virginia. So at that point, you will see males kind of chasing females around, trying to find an acceptable female to breed with. And you'll also see a lot of yearling bears that time of year. So usually those bears are anywhere from 80 to 100 pounds size, and the mom is kicking them away. They're about 16 months old at this point. They have been with her for about a year and a half, but before she breeds again, she has to run those bears away. So these are young bears that we often see getting into a little bit of trouble, looking for bird feeders, looking for trash, as they're trying to learn how to live by themselves. Sometimes these bears will be together. You'll see two bears at about 100 pounds running around together. When mom kicks them off, usually those siblings will stay together for a little bit, and then eventually within pretty short time after they've dispersed, they're going to also leave each other. Then once we get into the fall, it's all about food. They're trying to pack on the pounds before we get to wintertime and most of their food sources go away. So in the fall, they move constantly, just trying to find as much food as possible. And really what they're looking for is a wide variety of things. So most of a bear's diet is actually vegetative things. So berries, nuts, seeds, acorns, grasses, a lot of that. So again, kind of amazing when you think of this animal that can weigh 400, 500, 600 pounds. The majority of their diet is actually coming from vegetative matter, not meat. Really only about 25% of their diet comes from meat, and most of that is actually made up of insect matter. So again, ants, termites, bees, things like that. Although they will eat on deers, you can see in the lower photo on this slide, that is a bear that has found a deer that was hit by a vehicle on a roadside. They'll scavenge on carcasses left out in the woods during the hunting season. And they will prey on deer fawns during that first 2 weeks when a fawn hits the ground. They can't really move really well. Bears will certainly, if they find one, will eat one of those as well. But they're not really the best hunters out there. And most of their diet is made from non-meat items, actually, which is always kind of interesting to people. But one of their most important foods that they need are acorns. And so in a year when we have really good acorn crops, bears can put on more than 2 pounds a day during that fall, late summer, early fall period, which is super important then for them going into the den. Of course, acorns provide a lot of protein, fats, and carbohydrates, which really help them gain weight. So unfortunately, then in the exact opposite, in a year when we don't have a good acorn crop, which this past fall was kind of one of those. We had a really poor white oak crop across most of the state. Bears can't put on a lot of weight. And so that ends up affecting their reproduction. A lot of bears then will not reproduce if they didn't put on enough fat during the fall. And it also increases their time around human areas then. If they can't find their food out in the woods, they're going to start looking around neighborhoods for trash cans and bird seed and things like that. But in good years, when we have a good acorn crop, we usually see a lot of cubs out on the landscape, and then we see very few conflicts because those bears have found all the food they needed out in the woods. So reproduction of bears is quite interesting. As I noted, they breed back in July and August. So the peak of the breeding season is around the middle of July here in Virginia, but they're not actually pregnant right then. So a female bear, she breeds with a male in July, June, July, or August, and that egg is fertilized, but it just floats. So it doesn't actually implant into her uterus until around late November, early December. And again, this is allowing her to put on those fat reserves and actually decide, okay, am I in good enough shape to carry cubs through? Because taking care of cubs, birthing cubs, and feeding them is really high energy demand for a bear. So that is called delayed implantation. They are not truly pregnant until about the time frame in December. Cubs are then born in early January, so she is only pregnant for about 4 to 6 weeks, which is why cubs, when they're born, are so tiny. Most people, you would think an animal as big as a black bear, a 200-pound animal, would give birth to a much larger offspring. But since she is only pregnant for 4 to 5 weeks, those cubs, when they're first born, are anywhere from a half a pound to 3/4 of a pound and will literally fit in your hand. And they basically look like little rats at that point. Most people would probably look at it and not even know that was a bear on the first week of its life. But they grow really fast. They're getting all this highly nutritious milk from their mom. But you can see in those pictures what a 1-day-old cub up to about a week-old cub looks like. Then in that top picture, those cubs are about 3 to 4 weeks old. They're just getting ready for their eyes to open up. And then down in the lower right, you've got one that's about 4 months old. So exponential growth over that time frame while they're in the den. So another one of those kind of things we hear about bears is, do bears hibernate? Well, not in Virginia. They're not true hibernators, especially in Virginia, because we just, as everybody's kind of noticed, we don't get much of a winter here anymore. It's not really all that cold. So a bear will enter a den, again, especially a female that is pregnant and going to give birth to cubs, but she can be woken up. She is not truly hibernating. She will easily get up. Her body temperature falls a little bit, her heart rate's going to slow, but again, if she's disturbed, she can get up and run off. Bears that are not giving birth to cubs, so male bears or females that just are not pregnant, they can get up and be active anytime throughout the winter. So they may not even lay down at all. So it's quite interesting what they'll do. And so this video is of a research bear. Let's see if we can get it to play. So that is February 17th. And you can see this bear, she's wide awake. She is certainly not hibernating, not sleeping. She does have a den. And so watch as she's going to get up off of her den here in a moment and just look down in the lower left corner of the screen when she finally gets herself out of this hole. And you can see 4 little cubs down there. So she has cubs. But still would make these little small excursions off the den. Just for a couple of minutes she would use the bathroom, go down and get a drink of water. She's not going far, but she is awake and she is coming back and forth to that den. Again, only leaving that den area for very short periods of time, but not a true hibernator for sure. So what type of places do bears den in Virginia? They use a wide variety of denning sites across the state. Anywhere from tree dens, so they'll actually go into a tree and use a hollow cavity in the tree, all the way to just laying on the ground. So quite a few bears, even across the whole state, use these ground dens. And it's basically just a brush pile or where a tree has blown over and you've got that root ball area there. They'll dig out a little hole and that's where they stay. So the far left-hand picture is basically, it's a whole pile of brush and underneath it was where that bear had laid for the wintertime. So she was really good and protected. Nothing could really see her or get down to her. While on the opposite, the far right-hand picture, that bear is literally just laying in the wide open. That's in a stand of trees that's been burned. It's actively managed forest there. And then this is kind of a gully that runs through that strip of woods. And in the gully were all these blackberry briar canes and then all the soft pine needles. So she has a lovely soft bed of pine needles. But again, she is wide open to the elements. If it rains or snows, she's getting soaking wet. But her cubs, which were underneath her, warm as toast. So they had it made. The picture in the top right, you can probably just make out the bear's nose peeking up out of the hole. That was in some storm damage. A bunch of trees had blown over and that bear just found a little hole that she made right in that. And then kind of the middle picture where you see 2 little cubs looking up, that was a female bear that had actually just dug out a hole in the ground. And again, it's just surrounded by a blackberry cane and really thick, brushy areas that no people would like to get into. So she felt good and safe. But a lot of bears use these ground type dens. Some will use trees where they climb into the tree. So it's just a wide mix across the state. And again, this is another little video of a bear here in Virginia. coming and going in her den. See, she came in from the back. She had kind of two holes into this den, or two little alleyways that she would take to enter and exit her den. And she's getting all the cubs kind of corralled back under her, and will likely start nursing them. Cubs eat quite a bit throughout the winter time. All right, so before I move on to kind of our management stuff, that was our basics of biology. Does anybody have a question on the biology side, or we can wait until the end to do all the questions at the end, whatever folks would like. Right, well, hearing nothing, we'll keep moving. Maybe you'll think up a question by the end then. So let's go into some management. And this picture kind of just epitomizes why I love bears so much. They are just, again, very curious, very smart and inquisitive, and will do anything to get to food. And so this bear is obviously trying to get out to a bird feeder. You know, the landowners had taken every step to try to protect that bird feeder so a bear couldn't get to it by hanging it on a rope in between two trees. But hey, this bear, he was pretty determined. He wanted to get that bird feed. So in Virginia, our bear population, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is doing really well. And so we use our harvest data, so the number of bears that are harvested during the hunting season, to help get our population trends. And those really follow each other really closely. We do some work called population reconstruction, which actually gives us what our number of bears are across the state, but it is based heavily on the harvest. So that's how we track our populations. So this graph just shows our harvest across the state from 1930 up through this most recent hunting season in 2023. And you can kind of see that graph, the bars really start going up around 2001 up to about 2010. And at that time, across the state, our bear population was increasing by about 10% a year, which is really phenomenal for an animal that only breeds every other year. They only have 3 to 4 cubs. Not all of those cubs are going to survive each year, so they're a pretty slow reproductive species. They are a long-lived species. Bears can live into their 20s or even their 30s, but that type of growth is pretty impressive. Once we got up to about 2010, we started to stabilize, so we didn't see as much growth, although in the last few years, we've had kind of a little bit of a spike in some areas as well. But basically, where we have our highest densities of bears, so again, over in those far western mountains and down southeast in the swamp, our bear population is stabilizing. In the central part of the state, where bears are rather new to the landscape in the last 30 to 40 years, those populations are still increasing. And that's kind of shown best. This is just our relative density of bears across the state looking at forested habitat. And so the darkest green, that is where we have our highest density of bears. So on that map, if you can see it, it's likely pretty small on your screen, but there's a number 4, that is our bear zone. We break up our areas by zones for how we manage bears. So number 4 and number 20 down at the Dismal Swamp are our highest densities. Well, then that middle shade of green has still pretty high numbers. And then as the green lightens, that's where we have lower densities of bears across the state. So that kind of shows you where you'll find a lot of bears to fewer bears across the state. But again, that central Piedmont area is really filling in with more bears, just based on how they've filled into that habitat. So currently, our population objectives, we just finished a revision of our black bear management plan back in, I guess, October, November of 2023. And so in that newest plan, we have new population objectives. How do we want to manage our bear population across the state? And basically, all across the state where you see it's all white, we just want to stabilize. And so it just means kind of keep numbers basically where they are. That could mean we might have more harvest in some areas, or we might want to reduce seasons in some areas to just kind of keep it stable. Down in far southwest, we do have one area where the objective down there is to slightly decrease the population, just due to a lot of conflicts, a lot of agriculture damage down there. That area wants to just a slight decrease, but most of the state is a stabilized objective. And these were done with stakeholder input. It went out for public comment, so it's not something that the department just sets. This is out there for a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people to help us set these. And they'll be looked at every 2 years as we do our regulation cycle. We'll pull these up, we'll take a look, make sure these still fit, or do we need to change them? Would we like to increase anywhere? Is there anywhere else that needs a decrease? So these can certainly change during that 10-year lifespan of our bear plan. All right, so now onto the fun stuff, human-bear conflicts. And so this is where bears can be a little tricky at times. They cause us a lot of angst at times because they get into all kinds of things. But the real big key to it is usually it's just they're looking for food, easy food. If they can find easy food, why should they have to work hard for it? And a lot of times it's just very simply securing that food will make the bear go away. So in 2023, we have this thing called the Wildlife Conflict Helpline, which is run by the USDA Wildlife Services in conjunction with us. And it's a fantastic resource for people. You can call in or you can email and get information about all types of wildlife. It is not just specific for bears, but we use it to collect data on our bear calls across the state. But it's for somebody, if they see a groundhog and they would like to know more information about a groundhog, you can call. If you see a white-tailed deer and you're not sure about it. But again, people that have bear conflicts, this is where we refer them so they can get the standard information. So last year there were 2,472 bear conflict calls, and these are what we call our low priority. So nothing that really needed a response by anyone, just information given out to the public. And as you can see on the map, they're scattered all across the state, but there is a pretty big chunk of them where it's red or where we had the highest number of calls. And so Roanoke County topped the list. Roanoke had 249 calls last year, but Montgomery was pretty close, I think at 134, 130 or 184, one or the other there. So Montgomery was up there. So you can see those red counties are where we had the most calls, green, fewer calls. So those were the total calls all across the state. And these calls come in a variety of reasons. So the number one conflict call that we had last year was trash. And that wins hands down year after year. Trash is the number one thing we will hear about from bears. And it's because it's just an easy thing for bears to get to. There's trash cans at the end of driveways or residential areas. There are open green boxes or dumpster sites across the state. There's trash at restaurants. So there's trash across the state in a lot of places. So that was our number one conflict type, was trash. Behind that were bird feeders. And this is the same. We see this pretty much every single year. Trash wins, bird feeders are second. On our graphic there, sightings of bears is actually the number two most calls. But those are generally, a lot of times people would call in to say they had seen a bear. Then they would also say, oh, and it got into my trash. So a lot of times it was a dual thing there. But a lot of them, sometimes we just get calls that are just a sighting. And then even when trash was our primary complaint, bird feeders would often come in as then their secondary complaint. So it is, they fall hand in hand, it seems. Trash and bird feeders, the two things. And so that is where we spend a lot of time doing outreach on how you can secure both of those things across the state. So looking at those two just on a map type scale, where did we see most of these calls? Again, you'll see that little block there along the I-81 corridor of red counties where we had quite a bit of calls about trash, quite a bit of calls over there about bird feeders as well. So kind of those same areas where we were getting those calls. They had the calls about all of it. So what is our approach for conflict management? Well, the biggest part is just education and outreach. A lot of times these things are happening because people just simply do not know, one, that they have bears even in their neighborhood, or if they do know they have bears, they're not sure what to do. What is a bear looking for? Why did a bear come into their yard? Why is it around them? So it's basically just giving them education and information on what they can do to prevent these situations. We will come out and do on-site assistance, helping people figure out what it is that the bear is looking for. Is it bird seed? Is it their grill? Is it a compost pile? Help them realize what the bear is looking for and secure it. And then in Virginia, it is illegal to feed bears, so that no time can you put out food specifically for black bears. And so if somebody doesn't clean up their trash or their grill or bird seed and it's starting to cause an issue, they can actually be given a warning and even a citation for that in Virginia. At times, if it's escalated, if a bear's gotten into some trouble, we'll come out and we do what we call some aversive conditioning. Basically, we want that bear to associate people with not a good experience. So we'll use paintball guns, maybe some electric fence around a trash can, rubber ammo rounds to try to make that bear really understand that, hey, what it's doing, being close to a residential area is not where that bear should be. But unfortunately, if a situation is escalated and there's just not an option, this bear has really become habituated to people and to food, then we will actually have to come sometimes and humanely dispatch the bear. So that's obviously our very last resort and pretty rare. We don't have to do this often, thankfully. But again, that's why the education is so important. We need people to realize that if they don't clean up the problem and the bear keeps coming around and becomes habituated to that food, the last step is then the bear may end up being dead. So that old catchphrase, a fed bear is a dead bear, is very true. So we often get asked to please move the bear. Somebody sees a bear in their backyard, it gets into the trash, we get a call, come move this bear. Well, that doesn't solve the problem at all. Those attractants are still there. Other bears are going to come back into there, or other animals, raccoons, opossums, all kinds of things will eat trash and bird seed as well. So it doesn't fix any of that. By moving a bear, that bear knows where home is, and it's just going to try to come back to that initial area. And unfortunately, in Virginia, we do have a lot of roadways. Moving a bear is just not a safe thing to do. That bear will try to come back and could get hit on the highway, and it's been documented many times, bears being hit because they're trying to go back to their native home range. And so that's not anything we want to do. As you've seen in all these maps, we have plenty of bears across the state. So moving a bear would also be putting a bear into a new territory where it now has to figure out who's who, what the resources are. It's just not a good place to do that. And so there's just not a good option of moving bears. And again, it doesn't solve that problem. So we want to deal with the problems on site. We want somebody to know they need to clean up the area and take care of that attractant, or else more bears will just keep coming through. So we do not translocate any bears in Virginia. So we are part of this really neat program that really helps folks learn what can you do, and it's called BearWise. And so we want people to do their part to keep bears wild, and by doing that, then you can be BearWise. And it's very, very simple. Really, the biggest thing is just removing and securing those potential food sources. Just making sure that the food a bear might get around your home is not available. We'll ensure that the bear, maybe it passes through, but it doesn't stay because there's nothing there for it to eat. We use deterrence, again, that aversive conditioning, things like exclusionary fencing, electric fencing are really good. And prevention is always better than trying to fix the problem after the fact. And of course, it's not just at your house. You got to make sure your work area is being bear wise. And then when you're out recreating in the outdoors, camping, hiking, picnicking, you have to be bear wise in those situations. And so this resource will go through kind of some of the steps how people can be bear wise. And this will be the big part of what any volunteers that want to be part of this program will go forward and be telling people about, is this whole bear wise initiative and how people can do their part to keep bears wild. So again, around your house, it's food. And the number one things that we already said, trash and bird feeders. So if you can secure the trash and bird feeders, you will take care of 90% of the problems across the state. And it's pretty simple. You know, if you've got a trash can out, if you can put it in some type of secure indoor location until it's time for trash pickup, fantastic. If you need to set it out, use either a bear resistant can or modify the can so that, again, it's just not easy for a bear to get into. Bird feeders, we generally recommend, taking those down from the spring when bears become active through the early part of the winter. Or if not, we've got some recommendations on ways you can maybe secure the bird feeder a little bit better to keep a bear out of it. Bees, so that far left picture is a group of beehives there, putting a fence around it. Bears love the larvae in there in those beehives. And so the best thing you can do is put up a little electric fence. You'll keep them right out of it. So as we said, the garbage, the trash is the big one. So the most important thing you can do is to keep them out of that trash, because trash tends to be the first thing they get in an area. Once they get to trash, then they start looking for bird seed. Then they might start looking for compost piles, grills, livestock food, pet food, all types of things. But it usually all starts with trash. So again, things like, storing it inside if possible until the morning of pickup. retrofitting a can. So the can in the upper right corner, this is a program we work with Roanoke County on, that we provide. There's a cost share program. We work with them to provide these latches and bolt system that they can retrofit their cans. Where this is in the county, they don't use the automatic lift arms. It's actually a person that still comes out and dumps the trash. So this system works really well for them. The cans in the middle are all cans that work with the automatic lift arms on trash collection trucks that are bear resistant. So they just have a latching mechanism in the lid that keeps them down. A bear has to really, really work to try to get those open most of the time. So those are really good. Or we've had people that even build like a little shed, some type of secure area that they can just keep their trash can in. So there's a lot of ways to keep that trash up and keep it away from a bear. Again, the bird feeders, the number one recommendation is in the spring through the early part of the winter when they're most active is just to take the bird feeder down, especially if you have had an issue, you've had a bear around, best to take it down for at least 2 weeks minimum and clean up all that spilled feed, or again, preferably take it down for that entire time and use things like planting native plants to attract birds to your yard instead of the bird feeder. Bees, again, electric fence. So this is just, and thankfully it seems we've gotten out to a lot of bee clubs. We work with a lot of beekeepers across the state. Most everyone knows this one now. If you're putting up a new beehive or you're putting hives around somewhere, just put electric fence around it. And it works very well, keeps bears out of it. This little thing on the left is if you only have a single hive and it's too much trouble to put up a full fence around it, then you can use this little tiny just electrified wire cover basically that goes right over the hive and it electrifies it, and that can work really well. So a lot of options. We've got designs for all of this on our website and are happy to come out and help people with a lot of this stuff. So a lot of times people will clean up their attractants and do all this, but they still see the bear for a couple of days. So they think, well, what is going on? This didn't seem to work. Well, it takes a little bit of time. That bear, if it got a free food or free meal there for a few days, they're going to keep checking to make sure all that stuff is cleaned up. So you have to keep it really clean, be vigilant about it. And usually after 2 to 3 weeks, the bear is going to move on to go find somewhere else where they can find food, hopefully back in the woods. And it takes neighborhoods all working together. If you're keeping your trash and your bird feeders up, but 2 doors down, somebody else's trash is out every day, that's where giving them a little bit of education and letting them know that, hey, this takes the whole community working together to make sure these bears know they have to stay out in the wild and aren't getting food right from us. Same thing, again, when you're out recreating, so camping. Thankfully here in Virginia, we're really lucky that our Virginia state parks and the campgrounds on a lot of our national forest area or just privately owned recreation sites are really smart about being BearWise. And so they provide either these bear resistant containers, or they have got bear resistant containers at each campsite for you to use. Or they tell you that if you're going in the backcountry, it is required that you either hang your food or use one of the canisters out there. Of course, if possible, don't cook right beside where your actual tent is. If you can move a little ways from that and cook in a different area, that's always helpful just to limit smells right there. And then, just don't leave things out and about. That the cooler sitting up on the picnic table is just an easy calling card for a bear to know that, hey, there's easy food around. And it doesn't take them long to realize if they can get that, they'll be coming around campsites and people, which we don't want. Same when you're out hiking, of course, just basic principles out there. Always want to make sure we're aware of our surroundings. You're making noise, especially if you are hiking alone and in thick cover, you talk to yourself, sing, clap a little bit. Bear spray, we recommend bear spray if you are out hiking alone, but you need to know how to use it. And so there are great YouTube videos by some of these manufacturers on what to do. It should never be used as a preventative. You don't use bear spray to spray on your tent or to spray around a picnic table or anything like that. It is only to be used in the event that a bear is about to make actual contact with you. So it's very limited use. We hope no one would ever need to use it. But again, if you are hiking out in backcountry areas, it's certainly not a bad idea to have it with you. And the biggest one is keeping pets on a leash. If you're out and about hiking and recreating, you don't want your dog running around and running after a bear, running after a cub, or other wild animals out there. But in particular, bears, it is good. Always make sure your animal is on a leash. And again, in most of our parks and national forests, that's actually required by regulation there. So that kind of wraps up our management section. And then I've got just a little piece on a kind of emerging disease here in black bears in Virginia that hasn't quite reached down to the New River Valley, but it's unfortunately getting closer and closer. So I'll wrap up just a couple of slides here on sarcoptic mange that we now see in our black bear population. So probably most of you are familiar with mange. You've heard of this before in things like coyotes or foxes. It's a really highly contagious skin disease that's caused by a microscopic mite. So the one that infests bears, the mite is called a Sarcoptes scabiei. So that is why it's sarcoptic mange. There are lots of different types of mites out on our landscape. The common one that a lot of like canine species get is Demodex mange. But again, the one in bears is actually Sarcoptes that we have been finding here in Virginia. And so it generally starts out, they'll itch. You get these mites that burrow down underneath the skin. They cause this really crusty, thickened type of skin, which then leads to this intense itching. Well, you're itching and itching. That can lead to the hair loss. Then they can get wounds or scabs from scratching all the time. And unfortunately, they get such a high mite burden. They get so many mites on them, causes such an intense reaction that a lot of times they end up becoming pretty emaciated. So they just stop eating because they're in kind of a miserable condition. So they can get extremely skinny, and then they actually get pretty altered behavior. So they just become really lethargic. They stop really noticing that people are around. They'll just kind of lay there and let you approach them. So in the latter stages of this, it gets pretty unfortunate for the animal. Unfortunately, they just kind of lose all sense and are in really rough shape. So in Virginia, we had not had a report since 1994. We had one case back in 1994 in Rockingham County, then had not heard anything about it for nearly 20 years until 2014. We started getting some reports up in Frederick County, which didn't completely surprise us. West Virginia has mange that they get a few cases every year in their bears. And then Pennsylvania has had mange in their bears for 30 plus years. So it really didn't, a few reports didn't concern us. But then around 2018, the reports really started to increase in number and then kind of spread across the state. And so currently, this map here just shows since 2014, every report that has been confirmed. So we've actually either gone out and the bear ended up being deceased, or we had to put the bear down because it was in such bad shape, or we were able to confirm from photographs that it was sarcoptic mange. And so right now we currently get about 125 to 150 reports a year of mange. And it's just basically traveled down that I-81 corridor. It started up in the northwestern part of the state. Now our biggest cluster of cases are in Nelson, Amherst, Rockbridge, and then this past year, Botetourt and Bedford really came on as places that started getting a lot of mange reports. And again, this is where that wildlife conflict helpline comes in. We ask people to report through the conflict number. That's a one-stop shop. They can report that they've seen a bear that looks like it has mange, and then we get the information and we can respond to it. So we get a lot of questions, obviously, about, what are we doing about mange? So the biggest question we get is, why are we not treating these bears? Mange in a dog can be treated with something like ivermectin or another vet prescribed medication. But the problem with that is, keyword, the vet is prescribing it, and then you're able to give it to your domestic animal that you have right at home, and you know what it's doing. Wild animals, much more difficult to try to treat. The biggest thing, we can't put, ivermectin or some other treatment out there across the landscape that other animals could also come in contact with. So ivermectin in particular can have really negative effects and even kill some animals if it gets to the wrong animals. There would be no way to ensure the right dosage if you just put it out there across the landscape. And bears are actually considered a food animal, since we do have a hunting season and they are eaten. And FDA regulations require that any animal that is considered a food animal, if it has drug in it, any type of drug, it must be marked. So if we were to treat a black bear, we would actually have to capture it, immobilize it, put an ear tag in it, then turn it back loose on the landscape, which is extremely stressful for the animal, and just not a good option. And then we actually don't know that the treatments really work. So we tried treating some bears early on in 2014, 15, and 16 at the Wildlife Center of Virginia. They were given either ivermectin or one-dose treatments of another drug called Bravecto. And it looked like the bears got better. Their coats looked really good. They gained weight. And we thought, okay, that worked. This is awesome. So then those bears were released. We went back and got them from the center, put them back out on the landscape, and a subset of them, we put GPS collars on them so we could track and see how they did. All of them that we GPS tracked within a year died or had to be put down because they had mange again. And so it ended up, while it maybe cleared their initial symptoms and got them over that first round, once back on the landscape and these mites are out there on the landscape, they ended up becoming reinfected and it was much, much worse. So treatment is just does not seem to be an effective option, and thus we do not treat bears here in Virginia. So how exactly is it spreading? Well, they spread it from bear to bear. So like during the breeding season, when bears are mating, they're probably passing mites if one has it back to each other. A female in her den, if she has it, she can easily be spreading mites to her cubs. But it also occurs at these unnatural congregations of bears. So if somebody is illegally feeding or just unintentionally feeding, and bears are showing up there, then as you can see in this video here, if one has it, they'll all get it. And so this was a bird feeder that has been knocked down and the bears are all eating the spilled feed around it there. But you can see it's a mom sow bear with her 3 yearlings. The mom actually looks pretty good. She's just got a really light patch of mange, but the 3 yearlings, or at least 2 of them, they've started to lose quite a bit of hair. So they look a little bit worse. But all of them, they have spread it. As they're shaking their head, as they're rolling around, they're probably losing mites there on the ground. So then other bears that come to that food source are also going to pick it up. So that is certainly a way that it is spreading. And then a big question is it having any impact on our bear population? Again, Pennsylvania has had mange in their bear population for 30 plus years and has not seen that it impacted their population, but they rarely get bears that seem to get as severe a case as the bears we're seeing get. So seems a little bit different. We're actually looking at some harvest data and some trends in our bear population that seem to show potentially it could. It's probably having localized impacts, maybe for a pretty short period of time, but it may actually be having some impacts. And so with that, we're actually going to be doing some research with Virginia Tech starting this spring to look at some of these impacts of mange on our bear population. And with that, this website, or this list of websites here, just has our agency bear page, which has all kinds of information, again, about bears and living with bears. And then the BearWise website, I highly recommend. That has these fantastic PDF brochures that you can download. Just great little blogs and emails. You can sign up for a monthly newsletter from them that's fantastic. Just really good stuff. So the BearWise website is fantastic. I would highly encourage, if you are going to do the Master Naturalist program where you'll be giving talks to people, to grab a copy of this Living with Bears book. It is awesome. Yes. Fantastic. It is a great book. And it breaks things down in a real simple way that the public understands. So yeah, if you're going to be part of that program, I would say that should be homework, read the book. So awesome. I see some people have the book. And then our wildlife conflict helpline, that's just the number there. We try to put this out everywhere. Again, that's the one-stop shop for a lot of information on wildlife issues. It is toll-free. It is staffed just Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30, but you can leave a voicemail, and then they also have an email address that I can share as well. So it's just a great resource. And again, those calls get filtered there, and then they come out to our staff across the state. And we answer whatever calls need to be answered from there. And so just to wrap it up, everybody thinks bears are these really big, tough scary animals sometimes. And I always try to say, you know, look, this is a house cat that has treed this bear in that tree. That bear would not come down out of that tree until the cat left the area. So they're not nearly as big and scary as maybe people think they are. They're just funny, inquisitive, curious animals. And with that, I will take any questions that anybody has.
We do have a few questions in the chat. Some of them go back to when you were talking about dens.
Okay.
Someone wanted to know if they actually dig out dens.
Yep, they will. So they sometimes they'll find a nice hole and they'll just use it, but they will actually excavate out and dig a bigger hole to have as their den as well. So they'll do a little bit of work and dig out a hole to have a nice cozy nest in there.
Someone else wanted the definition of hibernation for bears.
So to be truly a hibernator, so if an animal actually truly hibernates, then they are not easily aroused. So think of like a groundhog or a chipmunk. If you go and find a chipmunk this time of year and you tried to wake it up, it would be really, really hard to do it. So that animal, their body temperature falls usually more than 10 degrees. Their heart rate is very, very low. And the act of them waking up from that torpor state, that hibernation state that they're in, is extremely stressful to them. So that would be an animal that truly hibernates. Black bears, now black bears in other states do truly hibernate. So if you go to Maine, you go into Canada, even Pennsylvania, those bears are truly hibernating because, again, they've got much colder winters. There are no food resources out there. But from Virginia south, bears do not hibernate. We just call it a torpor. They are in a torpor state because they have reduced their body temperature a little bit. Their breathing rate, heart rate reduces just a little bit, but very easily aroused. If you're truly hibernating, you're not easily aroused.
Someone wants to know if Virginia black bears are poached for their gallbladders.
Oh, you know, that was huge back in the 80s, 90s, even a little bit early 2000s. Thankfully, that seems to not be the issue that it was 15 or 20 years ago. We do get bears poached illegally, but it does not seem that so much is for the trade of their gallbladders anymore. Yep, but that was certainly, we do still have officers, covert teams that work on that type of thing, but it seems like that is not as big an issue as it was 15 or 20 years ago.
I think you partially answered this, but somebody commented that a few years ago, they were chasing a black bear out of Crater Lake Park with a paint gun. I guess they were hazing it.
Yep.
I want to know if any other state parks in Virginia have black bears around, and what to do if you see a black bear on a park trail.
Quite a few of our state parks have bears around. I would say, goodness, the majority of our state parks probably have bears that use the park. If you see a bear on a trail and it has not noticed you, the best thing to do is just back away quietly and just go a different way. If it did see you, just make some noise, clap your hands, you know, make yourself look big, but really making some noise, clapping your hands is one of the best things. Most of the time that bear then is just going to run off. It's not going to try to come towards you. If you kind of rounded a bend in the curve of a trail and all of a sudden you're face to face with a bear, simply step off the trail. Let the bear have the right of way. It's probably bigger than you. Just step off, let it go by, and leave it alone. But making a little bit of noise. But again, if you've kind of noticed one and it's a little ways away, then I would just leave that area. And you can always, if you're at a state park, report it to the ranger station. It's always good. They just like to keep track of bear sightings within the park.
Someone asks if there's any black bear research that we can help with.
Yeah, so currently we have got this big mange project that is starting up. So that's going to be focused in Rockbridge, Nelson, and Botetourt, and then we'll actually have another part of it happening down in Grayson, Wythe, and Smith County. So there could be some opportunities there. We'll be doing a lot with trail cameras where we'll actually set up these trail camera grids, and then a thing called hair snares. And it's just basically one little strand of barbed wire that makes a little corral, and the bear walks under it. And when it walks under it, it's going to leave us a piece of hair. And then we can go collect that hair for genetics and do a lot of sampling from that. So there'll probably opportunities for, people to go out and check cameras for us or with us, pulling hair. That's really the biggest project currently, is this mange research project that's starting up. We hope to maybe have some more in the future, but that's currently it. So I'll certainly, once we really get that going and the field side going, we'll make sure people know about it.
Someone commented or was wondering if the difference between the mange problem in Pennsylvania and Virginia is a matter of temperature because it's colder up there.
Yeah, we're not sure. We kind of wonder. So the Pennsylvania current bear biologist has only been there for about 5 years. We don't have any way to know what bears looked like 30 years ago, that when they first started getting mange. We kind of think that maybe bears up there have been exposed to this mite longer, and thus are just having less of a reaction to it. While here it's pretty novel. It just started in 2018, a few cases in 2014. So maybe over time, our bears will also not have such a severe reaction to it. But certainly temperature, it has a lot to do with how long the mite survives. The Sarcoptes scabii mite can live off of a host for up to 2 weeks in the right conditions. So our summers are perfect conditions. That little mite loves it hot and humid, so that can live really well. It can also live if it's above 40 degrees during the winter time. And so again, these warmer winter conditions we're seeing maybe are driving it. So that certainly is something we're looking into.
That's the last of the chat questions.
All right. Good questions.
Well, thank you so much for coming to talk to us about this. I'm hoping that a number of the people that showed up tonight are going to be coming to the second part of the training on the 29th.
Perfect. That will be awesome. Yeah, I hope it was interesting, and yeah, you guys, it has been this Master Naturalist program, getting people to do this BearWise stuff has been fantastic. We've heard good things from the chapters that are participated, that they've enjoyed it, and then the help it gives to us. There are really only about 10 to 14 of us field biologists across the state to talk about bears, and so it's not enough of us to spread all the information about bears.
Thank you.
We'll do what we can to help you out.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys have a great night.
Good night. Okay, anybody who's interested in the training, be sure to sign up in Better Impact because that is required. Tonight was just the first part of it. So the second part is required to complete the training so you can be involved in the activities to follow, giving presentations to the general public. Let's see, what else do we have? If you noticed in the calendar email that the Bears project team is looking for your bear photos. So if anybody has photographs of bears, there is a email address for you to share those. And those are bears, not just out in the woods, but bears that you see anywhere, including on your own property.
We're going to be putting together a table.
Also, Mara had sent out an email. We are, she had shared some job descriptions, just very brief descriptions of the positions that we have open for this coming year. And we really need volunteers to help with the administrative part of the chapter. It's not hard. We've got good committees that are already active, so it's not like you're just going to be dumped into a position without any guidance or help. It's actually pretty interesting, and it's just a great service. It's a good way to get your volunteer hours. If you can't make it out into the field, at least you can help with us running the chapter. So review that email and please don't wait to be nominated. You can nominate yourself. But we'd really appreciate it if you could step up and fill some of those positions. I think business-wise, that's about all that
No,
we have going on. Does somebody else have something they want to share? Did you say something, Mac?
no.
Okay, I thought I heard Mac.
Sorry, I didn't know because we weren't.
Would you like to share with the rest of the class, Mac?
Actually,
Well, I don't
was
know.
trying to get to the-
I liked your comment in the chat about you also run from cats.
Tanya, I will send you my bear picture.
Actually, I was trying to sign up for the bear training on my phone, but apparently you can't do that in the app. You have to do it on the computer.
Okay.
It was busy.
Does anybody have any questions about anything in general?
Thanks to all those who have expressed interest in volunteering out at the state park. Go ahead and get your application in and your background checks in, and we'll get you going.
And we will be figuring out the new calendar for this season very shortly. The state park has switched over to Microsoft calendar, so they're not using Google anymore. And Virginia Tech is going to be doing the same thing. They're in the process of doing that, moving over to a Google calendar, or not Google, getting away from Google, moving over to Microsoft. So we will probably be changing off the Google calendar as well, just because to match up with the state park, so that Aaron and Ryan can have access to our calendar. So I will keep you informed as to what's going on. But let you know here in a week or so.
Thank you. That's all I have for tonight.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks for-
you.
Thanks for coming.